Hi, I'm Whalley, welcome to Lenscraft. In today's video, I'm looking at the Affinity Photo overlay tools. You'll find two of these in the Affinity Photo Develop persona, which are the gradient and brush tools. These seem to cause people lots of problems, so I thought today it was time for a video to help. Sometimes it's possible to apply all the adjustments you need to make your RAW file look great with just the basic panel controls. But sometimes you'll find there's areas that are just a little bit too bright or too dark and that you need to enhance just those areas. This is where we can use overlay tools to make targeted adjustments to the image. When you look at the Overlay Studio panel, you'll see there's a master overlay. The Overlays panel lists all the overlays that you've created in the image that you're editing, so you can select and work with them. The default is the master overlay, which refers to the entire image that you're editing. So when this is selected, you're applying any changes you make to the entire image. Now let's add an overlay to target adjustments onto just the sky in the top half of the image. If you look at the bottom of the Overlay Studio panel, you'll see that there's two icons. We can use these to add new overlays and then draw our selection onto the image. One icon is to add a brush overlay and the other is a gradient overlay. I'll start by demonstrating the gradient overlay. After clicking the icon to add a new gradient, I can select the type that I want to create in the toolbar. You should also notice that the Gradient Overlay tool in the Tools palette is now selected. This is the other place that you can select to add an overlay from. For this example, I want to select the sky, so I'll use the Linear Overlay, but there's also a Radial and Elliptical overlays. To draw the gradient, I click on the image where I want the gradient to start, and then I drag down with my mouse to draw out the overlay. As I do this, you'll see a ruby mask over the area that I'm selecting. Notice the area above where I first clicked is solid red. The graduated area is then between that and where I've dragged to with the mouse. When I release the mouse button, the gradient is completed. In the Overlay Studio panel, you'll see the newly created gradient overlay. You can also continue to adjust the angle and size of the gradient by clicking and dragging the adjustment handles. Once the gradient is in place, I can move to the Basic panel where I can apply an adjustment to the overlay. As soon as I make a change, the red mask vanishes and I don't know of a way to redisplay it in the current version of Affinity. If you find that you need to check the area selected again by the overlay, try using the exposure slider instead. This can help you at least roughly see the area that you've adjusted. Something else to watch out for is that when you want to add another overlay of the same type, you can't just draw on the image, or you'll end up just changing the position of the current overlay. Instead, you need to click the icon to add a new overlay in the Overlays window. Alternatively, you can click on the master layer and then draw any new overlay. When it comes to applying adjustments to an overlay, you'll find most of the tools in the Basic Studio panel available for editing. The exceptions currently are the Clarity slider and the Colour Profile. You also can't add any of the adjustment tools in any of the other panels with an overlay. Now let's create another overlay, but this time I'll add a radial gradient to the centre of the image. Now when I click and drag, I add a circular selection from the point that I clicked to the point where I dragged to with the mouse. Look closely and you'll see a marker in the centre of the gradient line. This shows where the gradient starts. If I move this towards the centre of the overlay, it makes the graduated area larger, and if I move it outwards, it makes the graduated area smaller. Now let's change this to an elliptical gradient. I can do this by just changing the gradient type in the drop-down at the top of the interface. Notice that the elliptical gradient has an additional control to adjust the height as well as the width of the area. Now let's look at the brush overlay, which I can use to paint a selection of the rocks in the background. We can then use this to lighten that selection slightly. With the brush overlay tool, I can control the hardness of the brush, and I can also select the edge aware option. The edge aware control is perfect for selecting the edges of the rocks, but not the sky. If I make any mistakes, I can then use the Overlay Erase tool to clean them up. Now do be aware that this only works with the brush overlay. You can't use it to remove parts of, say, a gradient overlay. Now for a couple of final points. You can apply any development presets that you've created for the basic panel to the master overlay without affecting any of the individual overlays. The other thing that's often overlooked is that you can adjust the strength of an overlay in the Overlays panel by setting the opacity. Now if you're an experienced user with other raw developers like Capture One or Lightroom, you may find the overlays in Affinity quite restrictive. These are rather basic and crude selection tools in comparison, but you can still use them effectively. Hopefully Serif will develop them further in the future because the image quality from the Affinity Photo developed persona is superb. I hope you found today's video helpful. If you have, please share it with others. Also, if you have any tips of your own, please add them in the comments below. I'm Whalley, you've been watching Lenscraft. I'll see you next week for another video.